From WAMU 88.5 at American University in Washington, welcome to the Politics Hour starring Academy Award almost nominee Tom Sherwood. I'm Kojo and Tom. Tom Sherwood is our resident analyst. He's a reporter for NBC and a columnist for the current newspapers. Tom, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you.
I followed your advice after the holiday season and took a staycation. First time I've ever done that.
Excellent.
I really enjoyed it. I spent a great deal of my time monitoring your activities both here and on NBC4, but it was a lot of fun because I felt no responsibility for it.
I feel like a staycation is like what I call my pre-retirement days, where you get up when you want to, you go back to bed when you want to, you go out to lunch if you want to, you read if you want to. It's terrific.
It was absolutely
And of
terrific.
course, this is a great, did you get down to the Smithsonian museums or anything like that? Did you do anything cultural?
No, I didn't do anything productive at all. just stayed home and rested and did absolutely nothing.
Well, welcome back.
And welcome into the studio, David Grosso. He's a member of the D.C. Council. He's an independent who holds an at-large seat, and he chairs the Committee on Education. Councilmember Grosso, good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Kojo and Tom. Thanks for having me.
Do you take staycations?
I do.
I'll be on one next week, incidentally.
Oh, really?
I will.
Oh, I thought you were going away someplace.
Well, I might. I have to. It's hard to get out of the apartment. But you do a staycation.
We have done them and just hang out in town and do like you say.
You have big dogs, right? Two big dogs.
Two big dogs. Yep.
Well, if anything dramatic happens in the district, it's good to know that Stom will be here because we'll just call him in.
Well, there is potential for some activity in the previous administration wrap-up of all that unpleasantness.
Exactly right. So that's why you have to stick around, because if there is such activity, we will need you. In the meantime, the activity this week was not pleasant at all in terms of Metro. 3 days after a Metro passenger died and others were injured, Mayor Muriel Bowser says the city has still not been told at what time a train crowded with scores of passengers became disabled and began filling with smoke in a tunnel in downtown Washington. That from today's edition of the Washington Post. The question I have for you is that WMATA, the Metro, seems to say that everything has to come through NTSB. They apparently do not communicate directly with the city about this?
Well, it is true that when the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, starts an investigation, that you have to cooperate with that, and they ask for all the information. I don't think that means that Metro is muzzled. I do think, even Mayor Bowser started out by saying she thought the system was safe and she wanted more information and that we would have a timeline from the fire department and all of that. And then a couple of days later, she wouldn't repeat the Metro system is safe, and they have now, the new city administrator, Rashad Young, has put out a timeline for the fire department, which essentially says they got there, but they couldn't get into the tunnel because there was no clearance. And I was just talking to the council member a moment ago, and I'm sure he has some thoughts on this. 47 years the Metro system has been in place, and we still don't have an understanding that if there's a fire or smoke or something in a tunnel, that the procedure is just to cut the power and let the emergency people get in there. I mean, it sounds, and I realize things are more complicated than we'd like to make them, but that sounds, 47 years later, there ought to be some clear idea that the radios will work, that the people know where to go, and something can get done. This was a malfunction. But what if this were a terrorist attack? We always talk about terrorist attack. It's terror when you're in a tunnel and you've got smoke and you can't breathe and no one will come save you.
Elementary, my dear Grosso.
It's truly remarkable that they weren't prepared for this, and it seems like they weren't. And we'll see more as the investigations come out, and really exactly what the timing was, and who was supposed to be where and when, and who knew if the third rail was turned off or on, and all these questions that you would think would just be a simple checklist when there's an emergency situation happening. Somebody wasn't called that was supposed to be called, perhaps, but maybe everyone should know the information ahead of time. And certainly here it's been tragic and something that we'll never forget and hopefully won't repeat again.
That's what we said 4 years ago.
And the fact of the matter is that people were stranded in those trains for over 40 minutes, not having a clue about what was going on.
I have to say, when I first heard 40 minutes, I thought, well, when you're waiting for something or you're in a stressful situation, 5 minutes can seem like 40 minutes. I kept thinking, oh, these people must just have been kind of panicking. They felt like it was 40 minutes. No, the timeline shows they were there. And, then they tried to open the doors. They couldn't open the doors. They were told not to open the doors. It sounds like the driver of this train did all he could do. You can hear the radio reports of him saying he wants to back up, he wants this, he wants that, urging the passengers. He tried his best to keep the passengers calm. Please don't open the doors. Please don't do this, don't do that. Meanwhile, though, people were panicking.
And we will, I guess, be waiting to find out from NTSB as soon as possible exactly what happened.
Yeah, but NTSB, as soon as possible, that's like molasses. I mean, I'm sorry, they do a very good job in I can't remember her name, the former head who was here. She was very good about talking about how they do work. But their job is to find out what happened. Their job is not to get that information out as quickly as possible.
That's Metro's job.
To reassure. So we want to hear more from Metro. We want to hear more from the mayor. We want to hear from the fire department. And the mayor says she will be releasing some more information within the 24 hours.
And you say Metro is not muzzled by NTSB.
Well, you know, I'm sure they can point to laws and regulations from NTSB, but, you know, they have a duty to reassure and explain things to the public, not just to sit back for 6 months or a year. And I don't think they will.
This week, Marion Christopher Berry, who is the son of the late former mayor Marion Berry and a candidate for council in Ward 8, had yet another troubling incident at a PNC bank on 7th Street, Washington, that, according to a police report, is still being investigated, where he allegedly tried to make a withdrawal and, when informed that he was overdrawn, verbally abused a clerk and then picked up a trash can and threw it over the barrier and destroyed a security camera there. These are all, as I said, in a police report and are all allegations at this point, but it certainly gives the impression that what we're looking at, Tom Sherwood, is a troubled man.
Well, there's also PNC Bank video of this incident, which we have not yet seen, but I have the police report in my hand here. It says that the suspect one, that's Christopher, became upset and stated to the clerk, "You always give me a hard time. I'm going to have somebody waiting for you when you get off." You uses
the B word.
The B word. And then he picked up a trash can and launched it over the 10-foot high security glass, striking and destroying the surveillance camera. The incident was captured on surveillance cameras. This is not the behavior of any person in a bank that should be acceptable, certainly not someone who's running for public office. I happen to know that people close to him are just furious with him, that his behavior was unacceptable, that it's astonishing that he did this. He was there to pay he has a small painting company. He was trying to get money to pay his employees, I'm told. But there's just no defense, and he hadn't said a word publicly. I mean, where's the apology? Where's the "I was having a bad day" statement? Where's something from Christopher Berry? It's not the way you want to run a campaign. He does not have the wherewithal that his father had to make some mistakes and then have the people surround him. He doesn't have that much of a public record. This is not a good thing for his record.
It doesn't have the same kind of civil rights history his father had. Doesn't have anything like that at this point. So we can only speculate as to what's likely to happen going forward, because we really don't know, because Marion Christopher Berry Jr. is not saying anything at this point. District of Columbia is defying the Congress. It is challenging the House and Senate to either block or let stand that voter-approved ballot measure to legalize marijuana in the nation's capital. Member Phil Mendelssohn having the measure to Capitol Hill. It's starting the clock on that 30-day review window if the Congress or if the president do not act to block it. Ballot measure permitting possession of up to 2 ounces of home cultivation of pot could become law in the district as early as March. Councilmember Grosso, you have submitted legislation seeking to regulate marijuana in much the same way as you regulate alcohol. What's your expectation here?
Well, it looks like it'll be up at Congress for their layover, which once again, we all want to say we're opposed to having to do in the first place. It'll come out of there late February and then go into effect, barring any kind of further action by Congress. The bill that I introduced again this year, along with some of my colleagues, is going to have a hearing in early February, and we're going to try to move forward with that as well. That bill is not as clear cut when it comes to congressional action, because they tried to prohibit us from acting at all in that regard. So just by filing the notice for a hearing, perhaps even just by filing the bill in the secretary's office, as I did, may have been in violation. We don't know. Our general counsel is watching closely, and my opinion on this is that we push them as hard as we can, and we do what's right by the people of the District of Columbia. 70% of the people voted for this, and I feel like the Initiative 71 doesn't go far enough, so we have to, I think, put in a regulatory framework that can really monitor who is buying and selling and where they're buying and selling it, and just put in a structure that really monitors it.
The legal technicality here, Tom Sherwood, is that in the budget deal that the Congress approved at the end of last year, it said that the district cannot enact any laws having to do with approval of marijuana. The district takes the position that once voters voted on the initiative, the law has already been enacted. Now they're merely taking steps to make sure that that according to the legislation presented by Councilmember Grosso, that we move on it.
The Federal Budget Act, the $1 trillion act that they passed in the last heartbeat of that Congress, said that the city could not spend federal or local dollars to enact. And then Delegate Norton, Eleanor Holmes Norton's position, the city's attorney general's position, the council's position is that the people enacted the bill on November the 4th, well before this measure passed. But it is a real, I want to know what happens next. The Congress could just simply, the House and Senate could vote and the president could sign, they could insert it in any bill, a measure saying you can't do this, and then you can't do it. If that happens, you would stop, right, Mr.
No, I wouldn't stop at that point. Somebody would have to probably stop me at that point, and it'd be the lawyers for the city or perhaps the mayor or her lawyers. But the fact is that the people have already spoken, and I want to have a framework in place for the best implementation that when we do legalize marijuana, so that it's not being sold to minors, so that it can be properly.
First of all, many people are under the mistaken impression now that pot is legal in the city because it passed in November, and we ought to be clear that it is not legal now.
That's right.
And on city property or federal property, it wouldn't be legal on federal property in any event. So if this goes forward, if the Congress does not affirmatively act to block the Initiative 71 that's now before them, that will mean that marijuana possession in the city is legal after the 30-day period.
That's right. But
do you intend to pass some type of local legislation to bar the implementation of the law while the city has time to write regulations for the sale, or will simply marijuana be legal in as early as February or March after the 30 legislative debut?
Well, my original intent was to do this in a parallel process so that you would actually have the regulations in place at the right time. Because of what's gone on in Congress, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to do it quick enough. So in the end, I'm going to say we should let Initiative 71 go forward and legalize it for now, and then put the regulatory
possession of it, not the sale.
That's correct. It would just be the possession of up to 2 ounces at this point in time.
In case you're just joining us, our guest is David Grosso. He's a member of the D.C. Council. He's an independent. He holds an at-large seat. He chairs the Committee on Education. You can join the conversation by calling him at 800-433-8850. You can send email to kojo@wamu.org or shoot us a tweet at Kojo Show. Tom Sherwood is our resident analyst. He's a reporter for NBC4 and a columnist for the current newspapers. Note to self: pot is not legal yet.
Yes, and keep that in mind. Now, do you know what contempt of Congress means? If you don't,
we went through this debate when there was the potential shutdown and whether or not we were going to spend our own money that we raised on our own issues here in the district. And mostly, it was a debate around whether or not there was going to be a violation that could be enforced by Congress. And at the time, Mayor Gray was, I think, brave to say to OMB, everyone's essential, if you remember. But
yes,
that qualified for
different.
Sending a plan, and that was different than this. This is actually doing an affirmative act where we're actually doing what we think we've been elected to do, in spite of Congress saying this. This is more like the medical marijuana thing. When the medical marijuana referendum passed back in the late 90s, Congress did the same thing. They put a rider on our budget that said you're not allowed to implement that, no matter what. And the council at the time said, okay, we're not going to implement that then. And we sat on our hands for all those years.
Decade.
Yeah. And then now I think we're in a different place in the council. This is not right after the control board. This is many years later. We've had balanced budgets and we've been able to.
But Congress has quote, the Constitution says Congress has, quote, full legislative authority, unquote, over the District of Columbia. If you proceed with something that the Congress decides is illegal or improper, I mean, aren't you can be charged with a federal crime? I mean, there's jail stuff. Are you willing to take that step?
Well, they would probably charge us with the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is what they talked about a couple years ago, and
is that administrative or criminal?
It has criminal sanctions.
Yes,
you can go to jail for it, and yes, I'm prepared to do that. I think here in D.C., it's time for us to continue to, increase our efforts for home rule.
In that situation, would you be represented by the D.C. Attorney General?
We would be represented probably by the General Counsel's office at the D.C. Council. We have our own lawyers.
And you might need your own personal lawyers.
You are the new chair of the Education Committee. You have recently announced new priorities. Can you walk us through what those priorities are as you see them, and what concerns do you have as you prepare to address them?
Well, this is really what the most important work that I'm working on now, and I think it's important for us to get into this at this point. The Committee on Education, which is something that I've been trying to become the chairman of since I first came on the council, and I'm grateful to the chairman, Chairman Mendelson, for appointing me as the chair of the committee, is probably the most important committee in the District of Columbia. We touch every child's life, and it's our job in the committee to do everything we can to put every child in the best position that they can be to learn and to fully engage in their education process. So we're going to be working in the committee, myself and my colleagues, every day to try to put every child in the best position they can, whether it's the kind of things they need to help them be better in attendance, whether it be mental and behavioral health issues, early childhood education, working on the pre-K program. We've got a long list of agenda items, and we've already begun to implement those. We had a wonderful open house just the other day where almost 200 people showed up at the committee office at 4 p.m. to talk about these priorities, and it just shows you how many people care about this. This is, I think, the number one issue in D.C.
You are making the general well-intentioned statements that I can tell you right now Tom Sherwood generally hates.
That's true.
You also
not
said
ninth grade civics.
You also say to fully address these issues, the committee will engage on issues pertaining to housing and homelessness, mental health, criminal justice, transportation, and health. Now, those are background issues, and people would say, if you're going to focus on those issues, importantly, are you suggesting that you're not going to be nitpicking and interfering with the work of the school's chancellor? Because that is what your predecessor was often accused of doing.
I believe that the council's committee and the committee that I'm the chairman of has a responsibility to try to put every child in the best position to learn. Does that mean that I have to neglect the oversight responsibilities of the chancellor and of the charter system? No, I still have an obligation to make sure they're doing their job and doing it well, and we'll continue to do that in the best way possible. But I also believe that all these other issues, we have a lot of children in our system that are homeless. If I don't focus on those issues as well, then I don't believe I'm doing my job.
Have you spoken? Have you had a sit down? I mean, David Catania was a very aggressive chairman of the Education Committee. He got a lot of people think good things done, getting more money focused on children at risk and other matters. He was also, as Kojo just suggested, was accused of being maybe too aggressive and pushing Kaya Henderson to do more reform. Have you met with Kaya Henderson? Have you given her a sense of where you want to go, and where is she with you?
We did have a sit-down meeting earlier this week, and I have a...
Are you two copacetic?
We are. We have a 2-year relationship of working together on the committee and meeting regularly, and so I look forward to working with her. I also look forward to working with the Public Charter School Board to move the reform effort forward. Until we have high-quality schools in every neighborhood, we have failed. So we need to continue to push, and I have a huge sense of urgency about it.
Well, the big issue is the school boundaries. Not changed since the 60s. All the candidates for mayor, Muriel Bowser, Carol Schwartz, David Catania, each said they would tweak or make changes, or in Catania's case, hold off for a whole year before changing these boundaries, which are scaring parents about where their kids will be going to school, disrupting families. Where are we on the school boundaries so people will know where they're going to be going to school next year?
Well, Tom, the school boundary process is something that the executive branch tried to implement last year. There can be changes made to it as we move forward. It's not an overnight rollout, so it does take time, and there will be, I think, some tweaks to it as we move forward.
Do you have any tweaks?
I personally do not have any serious tweaks that need to be done at this point, and it's not going to be my number one agenda item. The fact is, though, that I know the Deputy Mayor Niles, who I've also met with, and the Chancellor and the Mayor and others have been looking closely at the boundaries and will make suggestions. And they can make these changes, but they need to make them quickly because the lottery process. The lottery process is underway, and then they're going to have to make them before that closes out. In the next month or so.
Gentlemen, please don your headphones. We're again going to go to the phones where Oscar in Washington, D.C. wants to get more specific than either Tom or I have been so far. Oscar, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good afternoon. I hope that you will be a little more aggressive in addressing this issue. I went to a community meeting on how to select a principal for a school. And it seems that DCPS has lack of transparency. We have a new school opening in Ward 5. Went to the meeting, and what did we find? No candidate. They had a summary of resumes, no names, no anything on it. They did have writing samples which we could look at. But other than that...
When you say you want more transparency in the selection process, Oscar, what do you mean?
Picking a principal. Now, whether or not...
You seem to be suggesting that the community should be involved in picking the principal.
Well, at the point, we need to know if we're going to be asked to look at some candidates, we didn't have anything to go by. I mean, we had summarized resumes, no names or anything indicating their backgrounds. And it seemed like the process was extremely rushed. It just seemed to be a lack of transparency. I mean, we have to have an established process. Now, I don't know whether they're going to use Municipal 5, Chapter 5, or the Municipal Red, but it just seemed like they came in there and made up some process. And we were
Councilmember Grosso, do you know anything at all about this?
Well, I can agree with him that it needs to be an open process where everyone can be involved as much as possible. I do think ultimately it has to be the chancellor's decision on who she selects for the job. But when people are engaged, then they're more willing to buy into it in the final decision. And that is a benefit for the whole system. So I've been asking for more public engagement and more openness and transparency in the school system for 2 years, and we'll continue to push that issue.
How many schools do we have? Elementary and high school and middle school. What is it? Is it 125?
130, I think.
Something like that. Yes, we want parents to be actively involved in their schools, but at some point, the chancellor has to make a decision, manage the schools. You can't have a proletariat vote on every person who's going to be principal or who's going to have the janitorial services. Certainly, people can be informed, but I don't think you're suggesting that there will be a community vote on who the principal would be.
No, but I think community engagement is extremely important on the decision-making process. Ultimately, though, the chancellor's job is to select the people that work in the system, and she has to be accountable for that. So the people have to weigh in as much as they want to and as much as is proper. But like you said, ultimately, she's the one.
800-433-8850 is the number. You can send a tweet at Kojo Show. We got one from Kevin who said, is Councilmember Grosso concerned about turnover among high school principals, not just at Wilson, but several others too?
I think turnover of not just the principals, but the teachers is something that we have to focus on. It is one of my top priorities to look into how we make sure that we're supporting the teachers and supporting the principals in a way that they want to stick around and the way that it's possible for them to stick around. The 1-year contract question is one that will come up at the council hearings next month, and something that we'll be looking for the chancellor to explain and better understand.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say that I was surprised to find out the principals only have 1-year contracts. On the one hand, that keeps you focused on keep doing your job because you have a 1-year contract.
Keeps me focused on mine.
I have a 1-year contract. Come to think of it. Well, but we're not responsible for anybody. We're just a media.
Speak for yourself.
But on the other hand, it seems to me that it's hard to. Even Kaya Henderson has said she wants to stay to 2017. I mean, she's told us that publicly. So she has a longer term view. I mean, how can you become a principal to come into a new school, do all the work that's required to get to know the teachers, the staff, the students, and then get all the planning done, and then suddenly the year's over?
I think that's a great question and something we're going to be getting into with the chancellor on about. But at the same time, you notice the ones that are high quality principals are there for a long time. They're there longer than a year by a long shot, and they know that. It's not a surprise to
And
them.
principals really make a difference too. It's not just the teacher in the
Huge
classroom was the first line.
Let's talk politics. In the past, you have expressed concern that one-party dominance in D.C. politics may be prompting low voter turnout and electing officials that may not be truly representative. You have introduced a bill this month calling for instant runoff voting in elections for the mayor, the council, the attorney general. Explain why you think that would help.
I just think that it would be better to have a majority rule in this democracy, and basically that
How
means,
would it work?
So you would rank. So it's your top 10 or 12, however many candidates are in there. You rank your preferences 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if nobody gets 51%, then you drop off the bottom one. You add the votes from number 2 in, and you keep going until you get to 51%.
Can our elections office do that?
Well, they've had problems with simpler problems in the past.
Well,
with simpler issues in the past.
Well, I mean, I don't think we should not legislate because our government's incapable of accomplishing something. I think instead we should push the envelope a little and help them get to the point where they could actually implement it. It was a golden opportunity, I think, this year to do this during the special election. You have 4 and 8. There'll be plenty of candidates that you could pick from, and then ultimately it would get to 51%.
Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, when he first was elected at large, I can't remember the year, but he got 19% in a crowded field, and the next person I think had 17%. But Mendelson won. He had one more vote than anyone else. Even Alyssa Silverman in her law, she didn't get I can't remember the percentages in the teens, but she was much higher than everybody else. But so you were saying a voter would have to get 50%.
50.5. A candidate would have to, yeah, and it's done in other jurisdictions. It's
incumbents are not going to like this.
Majority.
You're an incumbent now. You'll have to rethink this. Most incumbents would not like this. You're opening yourself up to criticism. I mean, to losing.
I'm not a normal incumbent.
Well,
I think.
Well, we hope you're not saying you're not normal.
I am different.
Here is John in Arlington, Virginia. John, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Kojo, how you doing?
Doing well.
I'd like to comment on the first of all, the election system the guys talked about is the Australian system. That's okay, but there are other ways to do it. But I want to talk about Metro. I have 3 points. After the 9/11 attacks, the commission came out and was talking specifically about improving the communications between police organizations and other people involved in first response. Now, you would have thought, if this is a problem, and we haven't heard that it is, that that the people in Metro, especially after London and Madrid, would have wanted to make sure that the communications between firefighters...
Okay, we're running out of time. Your second issue?
Okay, the second issue is there's a lot of talk that the guy in the train couldn't back up into L'Enfant Plaza. My question is, did nobody think of having the train go the other way to the Pentagon, the Pentagon across...
Third issue.
And the third issue is the communications in the car. They were apparently one way. That's what the first reports were. The people apparently couldn't call up to the driver and say, we got a problem. He could communicate back, but they couldn't communicate up. Now, I want to know if that's been followed up.
I suspect that your third issue is not going to be resolved, because I don't think any driver can drive properly if he's being, or act properly.
I think there is an emergency
there is an emergency button, but
and on the backup, I'm not sure about that one. But I would say the communications thing is really serious about whether and there's this great word interoperability, where everybody can talk to each person, and that is as stupid that is not done.
Councilmember Grosso, on the other two issues.
I have to agree with Tom that the communication.
Can't back up. Why not go forward? He says on the train.
I think they were stuck and couldn't go either way, but the investigation will bear that out, and it'll be certainly a question that'll be asked. I think your point about communications up into the cab, wherever the conductor is a good point. But when the thing is stopped and there's an emergency, you have to be able to communicate.
Maybe we need that string in the old bus where we pull the string.
That's true.
Pull the string. Sir, we have smoke in the car.
Yes. I think the driver in this case knew that. Though. Thank you very much for your call. Councilmember David Grosso is a member of the D.C. Council. He's an independent, holds an at-large seat, and chairs the Committee on Education. Thank you so much for joining us.
Can I ask him one quick question on his way out?
You know you would anyway.
I'm going to. I don't know. That's just being polite. Charles Allen, the new Ward 6 council member, has introduced a bill which would give a book a month. This is essentially a book a month club to children up to 5 years old, to get them reading before they get into school, because he says by the third or fourth grade, they can't read, they're not into books, they lose out. Will you support something like that? He says a DC library can make these books available on an age-appropriate basis to about 5,000 preschool kids.
Charles and I have spoken about it, and it's an impressive piece of legislation. It's done in Tennessee as well, and I'm looking forward to working with him on it to see if we can implement it in a responsible manner and continue to work on all literacy issues from pre-K all the way through adults.
Our next guest will be the Maryland State's Attorney for Montgomery County, John McCarthy. If you have questions or comments for him, you can start calling us now at 800-433-8850. In the meantime, Tom Sherwood, let's talk Virginia legislature for a minute, because Joe Morrissey has been re-elected. He is a Democrat who is now serving a jail term because of his relationship with a 17-year-old. And the dilemma, apparently, that now confronts the legislature is whether, in the face of the voters deciding to send him back to the General Assembly, they should now take steps to oust him from it, going against the will of the voters. Some say, look, we have standards here in the legislature, and our standards indicate that if we are not satisfied with the conduct of one of our colleagues, he does not meet those standards, then we have a responsibility to reject him. I remember this going back all the way to Adam Clayton Powell Jr. in the U.S. Congress many years ago, when he was ousted after the voters had put him back in office. What do you say?
Well, as a citizen who doesn't have a vote for Congress, I'd like to say I think the vote of the citizen is really important. And as much as this is a laughter a matter for a lot of people, he was charged. He took a plea deal. He's now serving whatever it is. He has to spend the night in jail. Yes. So he has a bracelet monitor. He parks his fancy Jaguar or whatever it is at the jail. But the people knew this. He resigned from his seat and then immediately announced he would run in the special election to succeed himself. He did. The voters voted for him, and so he's back. So I think that has to be respected, no matter how disgusted you might be with his behavior. So we'll go forward from there. But it's an embarrassment to the state of Virginia and of how this is being played out. But again, the voters voted him back in.
We'll have to see exactly what happens in that situation. Joining us now in studio is John McCarthy. He is the Maryland State's Attorney for Montgomery County. John McCarthy, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you.
It's great to be with you.
Do you have any? Can I ask? Do you have any view of that? I mean, the voters. I mean, how many times have you been refreshed by the voters?
I've been refreshed 3 times.
So what about
that? Break that habit.
I know it's a different system. It's the state of Virginia, not Maryland, not Montgomery County. But what do you think about that?
I think ultimately the voters get to decide, but to some extent, because I think we should all be invested in public trust in government, I think somewhat undermines public confidence in the caliber of people that we put in government. And I mean, the people get the final word, but again, people often snidely refer to people as politicians,
but I think
in a bad sense, and there's some great public servants out there, and many of them are friends of people that are in this room.
And I think you're right, because I think that's what the legislature is considering, and that is, to what extent does this affect how we are regarded by the public? To what extent does this affect the public's confidence in us if we keep this guy in the legislature? But ultimately, the decision is theirs to make. Last week, you co-wrote an op-ed in the Baltimore Sun with the United States Attorney in Maryland, Rod Rosenstein, about where the justice system fits into what you see as one of the most pressing public health issues in the state: heroin use. Heroin deaths in Maryland have doubled during the past 3 years. How do you explain that spike, and what are you and the U.S. Attorney aiming to do about it?
Well, I think that Rod Rosenstein, who's our outstanding U.S. Attorney in the state of Maryland, I think we have been both concerned just simply by the enormous rise in deaths throughout our state. This heroin epidemic, and it is an epidemic.
10 people die a week, you guys were saying?
I think Rod quotes that number. I will tell you, I know from the statistics that I've received from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene for Montgomery County, for Maryland, we had 464 deaths in Maryland in 2013, the last year for which we had a total year statistics. That number has increased 46% in the first 6 months of last year. I think that we are going to be, and this is an awful number, but we're going to be perilously close to about 700 deaths to heroin overdose in Maryland in the last couple of years.
So what can you do?
And why is it happening?
Well, if I could begin with the why it's happening question first, I think there are a number of contributing factors. Number one, street purity values on heroin across the state of Maryland. We've seen a rise in generally street value purity was about 9%. We're now seeing about 41% purity levels of heroin that's being distributed typically in Maryland. The other thing is some of the cutting agents. We always say to people, you don't know what you're getting or buying when you buy heroin. And unfortunately, the cutting agent that has come into favor more and more is fentanyl, which itself is also an opiate. And the cocktail of the fentanyl and the heroin together is what is absolutely causing these deaths.
What heroin death is? You have a heart attack? What?
Basically, it affects your ability to breathe, your respiration. It halts your breathing, and ultimately your heart will stop. And sadly, one of the things that is emboldening a number of people to continue to use heroin with greater frequency and then maybe in more dangerous cocktails is the presence of a drug was meant to save their lives. I know you guys know what Narcan is. This is this special spray that can be given within a few seconds of the administration or the usage of heroin. It can actually bring people back from the dead. In my state, there's a saying that the greatest risk of an overdose is having survived an overdose, because people who are brought back by Narcan are emboldened.
So we know you described the problem. What's the solution?
Well, I think the solution is a comprehensive solution. Look, I think public education always has to be part of this component. And as part of that public education, one of the things we did in Maryland last year, and I salute the legislature for this, is they passed a Good Samaritan bill. And that Good Samaritan bill basically said, look, if you are with someone, you notice that they are in a crisis medical situation because of the ingestion of a narcotic, call 911. Call. We'll give you immunity. And I support that. Look, Rod and I are prosecutors, but we recognize you don't prosecute your way out of a problem. So one of the first things we do is we educate people about existing laws that say, if you're in a situation and someone appears to be in crisis medically because of the ingestion of heroin, call 911. You will not be prosecuted. This is about saving lives, not about locking people up.
The difference with this heroin epidemic than epidemic that we have known in the past is that now it's not only a statewide problem, but it's an urban and suburban problem. A lot of people who think they understand urban life because they've watched The Wire may be thinking, I thought heroin was a problem only in cities like Baltimore. But
Kojo, this is part of the public education campaign, and you could not be more right. The deaths according to heroin are all across the state. They are not limited to the inner cities, not limited to Baltimore. They are everywhere. My most recent heroin overdose death in Montgomery County, which happened 3 days ago, happened in a country club community.
Is that on the public record? Which one?
It happened in a public, and it's not, and I'm going to stay away from that. I'm not a member of any of them, but the point being here, Kojo, this is a situation. I mean, the numbers actually, in reality, and because I think people naively think that it's not going to affect them depending upon where they live in the state.
Is it the cheap price that's contributing to it?
It's dirt cheap. Heroin is dirt cheap, and that's
$10.
That's exactly right, Tom. And I think
I only know this because I've read about it.
Well, I'm assuming.
Larry Hogan, the incoming governor, is upset. He made this part of his campaign.
He said heroin is top of the list of the public health issues.
Well, I spoke directly. I have spoken to Mike Bush. I've talked to Mike Miller. I have spoken directly to the governor, and I know that the governor has actually tasked his incoming lieutenant governor, Mr. Rutherford, I guess, as being head of this particular task force. And I think everybody in Annapolis is deeply committed to doing something, hopefully, in this session to make things better. And we have an idea of an additional bill that I would like to see passed as well.
You would like to push for a law that would hold dealers responsible for drug-related deaths. How would that law work if the idea was able to get through the assembly?
Well, I do support that, Kojo, and I would also indicate to you that the feds have this statute. There's a federal statute that basically says that if you distribute drugs and the drugs that you distribute result in death, you can be prosecuted for the distribution of drugs resulting in death.
What happens? Well, if I'm a dealer and you're a user and I give you drugs and then you have a seizure and you're about to die and I call 911, can you still prosecute me?
No, I think that's actually the more unusual scenario. But because I think we have to chiefly be worried about saving lives, I think you get immunity in that situation, because I think that, and I think you would write that in right into the law. I think the reality is when you score heroin, very seldom are you using the heroin right in front of the person that dealt to you. And even if you passed a law, which, and I think this is a law, an additional tool to try to deter people from selling heroin, knowing that there is going to be a responsibility for the lives that are lost as a result of the drugs they distribute. You will not always, look, I know that we're not always going to be able to find out who the distributor of those drugs are, but in those instances where we can, there will be a consequence for people who are willing to put this drug out of the
Our guest is John McCarthy, the Maryland State's Attorney for Montgomery County. You want to talk to him? Call us, 800-433-8850. You can even go to our website, kojoshow.org. Join the conversation there.
Let's talk. You're involved in trying to get background checks on people who work in the school system.
I actually support that.
Can we just do a background check on every person? I mean, I'm just concerned that we'll just have so many background checks. I know we need background checks on teachers. Then you need background checks on the janitorial staff. You need background staff on the coaches. And I mean, where does it stop? Does everybody get a background check?
Well, I think that those people who have substantial contact, and look, this grew out of this is the new proposal from the school board by the superintendent of schools to the school board just the other day. I had a member of my staff that participated in formulating these extensive proposals, and they are pretty comprehensive. But to me, the issue is if you are having extensive contact with children, or be in a situation where you would be isolated with children, I think we have to protect our kids. I think you do the background checks of people who are going to be in isolation or substantial contact with children.
Michael Durso, who's a member of the school board, he reported that this has been talked about since going back to at least 2013 and maybe more, and nothing. Nothing's
well,
been done.
You know what?
A little has been done.
I know Mike a long time. I knew my first contacts were when he was a principal. I think I met him. He's had several stops before he
He's on the council, not the.
He's on the
board.
no. I met him when he was a principal.
I know, but now.
I know he's on it, and I was there
Okay.
when he made exactly that same comment the other day. I heard him say that. I think one of the things that hopefully because Mike made the comment, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Haven't we sort of been here before and done this before? And in this case, the schools, I think, operated a little bit in a vacuum the last time they tried to address this issue. They did not bring the police into developing this policy. They did not bring the state's attorney's office in. They did not bring in child protective services. They had, there was almost like a silo way in which they approached this. So, look, this is not an easy solution. There's not an easy solution to this, but I'm hopeful that the fact that there are more people at the table and we're taking a more comprehensive approach, the result will be better. I understand Mike's observation.
Put your headphones on, please, because you're about to hear from Seth in Washington, D.C. Seth, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Kojo. How are you doing today?
Pretty good.
How's everybody else?
They seem to be doing pretty well.
Very good. I've been hearing about the epidemic of drugs, the recent one in particular, and I feel like the approach now is like it is a medical emergency as opposed to a criminal issue. Am I completely wrong, or is it the?
What are you saying? The approach now is as a medical issue and not as a criminal issue, or the other way around?
The emphasis is on the saving lives as opposed to putting people in jail like they did in the past 40 years, where we have filled jails with people who
are addicted
for minor issues.
Is that the emphasis now, indeed? On saving lives as opposed to incarcerating users?
I actually think the emphasis should be on saving lives. That's exactly why when Tom asked a question earlier, if I was a distributor of drugs, would you envision under this new law that we are talking about that the person would get immunity if they called 911 if someone fell into a medical emergency? I think the answer is yes. We'd write that right into the statute. It would be consistent with the Good Samaritan law that was passed last year, because at the end of the day, the bottom line for all of these different things, and I think we have to be comprehensive. You can't lock your way up out of this problem. Is saving lives. That's the bottom line. And I think that should be the approach.
Chris, but Seth, thank you for your call. Chris in Durwood, Maryland seems to have a slightly different view. Chris, your turn.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. It's a sort of Darwinian evolution. I mean, I'm not so sure the emphasis should be on saving lives. Then you wind up spending taxpayer dollars to save lives so that people can go back out and buy drugs from the drug distributor, which probably makes the drug distributor happy. I think we should publicize this increase in deaths very widely to keep people informed that if you're dumb enough to take heroin, you're very likely to die. And if you die, then if you're rescued and brought back to life, then you just go back out to take more heroin. And I'm not sure that's a good idea. The other aspect of it is that heroin is now a lot cheaper than oxycodone and all the other opiates that people get addicted to. But I'm just wondering whether the emphasis should be on pulling these people back.
Just let them die. That'll teach other people who want to use it a lesson, says Chris.
I just don't think we as responsible public servants can accept that as a policy. I think that, treatment, I do agree with the caller that we need to get education out there and people more aware of this problem, because I think a lot of people are naive to the fact that this drug is in their community and the danger that it poses in their community, and therefore they're not immune, and it's in every section. But I don't agree with the bottom line that I saw some comments on a tweeted line the other day about, well, it's just a matter of thinning the herd. I just cannot accept that as a matter of public policy.
On different subject, body cameras for police. Charles Ramsey, former D.C. police chief, was in town. He's the commissioner in Philadelphia now. He's heading the president's study on police community relations.
Chicago, D.C., Philadelphia. Where next?
We are retirement probably. but he said we talked about body cameras, and he said in some cases police officers are having to arrest people that they might have previously just scolded because they're concerned that if they don't arrest them, they'll be accused later of being too lenient on someone. And then he said, well, maybe police cameras could be used for training, but they don't always have to be out on the streets. Do you have a public position on street body cameras for police officers?
I do, in fact, support the expanded use of police cameras. I know that it in my county, Gaithersburg City, began a pilot project this week. I know that the police in Montgomery County are going to probably have a pilot project before the year's out. I think that there are some, pragmatic issues about cost, retention, protecting privacy of other individuals who may come within the purview of that camera being located. But most of the national studies, and I've read a number of them regarding body cameras, have seen not only a reduced use of force by the police, but improved conduct by citizens who come into contact with the police.
Because they're on camera.
But they're on camera.
Yes, I had that same problem as a TV reporter that, they're reluctant to actually say what they think when you have a camera pointing their face. Can I ask you, assisted suicide? It's an issue coming before the Maryland legislature. It's been introduced in the D.C. Council by Mary Che in Ward 3. I know a little bit about your background and your upbringing, and you have 4 children and 6 or 7 grandchildren.
Pretty close.
What about assisted suicide, like Oregon and Vermont?
You are really challenging the Irish Catholic guy.
Yes, I know.
Aren't you? And I've not looked particularly at those bills, and
but you would prosecute people who participated in this assisted suicide. Now, if a physician helped kill someone, that would be a crime. Federal or state.
I think we would look close. Look, I think people are entitled to die with dignity as a touchstone. I think that I'm not giving people immunity for participating in assisted suicides, but any case that comes to our attention, we look at each case individually. I do not have a policy. I don't know that I have a fully formed idea on this particular topic, but you are challenging my background here. I think you're having some fun at my expense here.
On Cleveland Park, I talked to an elderly black man who said, well, as an old Baptist, he called himself, I think the good Lord should decide when you die. But he said, unfortunately, I also understand that people are in great suffering at the end of their lives, 6 months at the end of their lives.
Got to understand that. Here's Elaine in Potomac, Maryland. Elaine, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Kojo. I wondered what Mr. McCarthy's approach is to addressing gun violence, particularly in the area here. But we're in an area, I'm in Montgomery County, but being next to Virginia, which is one of the gun-running, trafficking highways, how do you think reducing gun trafficking and gun violence in general is going, and what specific policies do you recommend?
Well, let me say, I actually welcome this question as an introduction to the fact that, and I think this has been, we've discussed this before in my own county executive, Mr. Leggett, during the period of time that Mr. Leggett and I have been working together, along with Tom Manger and the other people in law enforcement. We've seen nearly a 30% drop in crime across Montgomery County. The drop in crime in the state is closer to about 15%. The drop nationally is about 12.9 or 13%. So I guess despite all of the things that we talk about often that are challenges to us in the area of criminal justice, we do have a nationwide and a very precipitous drop in crime here in our own.
Also, drop in gun violence?
I think that almost any category of crime that you see, there is a reduction. It's difficult, if not impossible, to find a category of criminal activity in Montgomery County in particular that's not got down. Now, how do we address the issue? I will tell you, I do believe. Look, I don't have a lot of strict policies, but if someone uses a crime, a gun, a handgun, in a crime of violence, we have a policy that you must plead to the handgun. Because I think that is one way to reduce. We do not drop gun cases, and we are very aggressive in the prosecution of gun cases as a way of deterring that kind of activity.
I'm afraid we're just about out of time. John McCarthy is the Maryland State's Attorney for Montgomery County. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here.
Any time for one little quick question?
No, we
I
only
hear
have
the music. There
literally
goes the music.
30 seconds left.
I was going to embarrass him. I'll wait till the next time.
Comment on the fact that next week
thought you
Tom
already did
Sherwood may not be here because he's going to be on a staycation. Can you do anything about the weather while you're gone? Will it get warmer?
That's the other guys.
Tom
not me.
Sherwood, he's our resident analyst. He's a reporter for NBC4 and a columnist for the current newspapers. Thank you all for listening. I'm Kojo Namdi. Coming